Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm 32. I live in Manchester, wear jumpers for emotional support, and I'm a regional governor for public policy, which basically means I spend half my week fixing problems created by men named Clive who think Excel is a personality. My dad still thinks I do admin, but we'll get to that. Oh, and if you're expecting a nice, tidy story where everything makes sense, bless you. Life's not Bake-Off, it's more like EastEnders with slightly better lighting. In our house, Sunday roasts weren't just a meal. They were a bi-weekly performance review, disguised as family bonding. Picture it. Yorkshire puddings rising like Temper's lamb carved with the same intensity one might use to open divorce papers and gravy. Thick enough to drown your unprocessed trauma in, Mum, bless her, would flutter between the table and the kitchen like a peacekeeping UN delegate armed with nothing but a dishcloth and delusion. She'd say things like, "Let's just enjoy the food, shall we?" As if roast potatoes had ever stopped. Dad from launching into a monologue about wasted potential before dessert. And Dad, oh Dad, had opinions. Mostly about the economy, youth laziness, and how I never quite had that entrepreneurial spark. He'd say that while cutting his meat with the same energy you'd use to sever family ties. But of course the sun rose and set on Oliver Dear. Perfect inspirational Oliver. Oliver, who at the age of 10 built a Lego business center, rid 6 bricks stacked on a base plate with a post-it note that said CEO, and was immediately dubbed the next Richard Branson. We all had to gather round and pretend it was structural engineering while Dad actually teared up and muttered something about legacy. Meanwhile, I got a merit in year 9 science. A merit, not even a full distinction, imagine the shame, and was told very helpfully, "Well, you're tidy with your handwriting. Maybe something secretarial, right? Because what every 14-year-old girl dreams of is typing up invoices for a man who smells like instant coffee and midlife crisis." It didn't matter that I read constantly or that I was the only one who knew how to reset the bloody Wi-Fi router when it inevitably gave up. No, Oliver was the visionary, the genius, the boy wonder, and I was the background character in a family sitcom that only aired during meal times and had terrible writing. Every compliment I received was served with a caveat. Ellie's good at school, but not everyone's academic, are they, Oliver? Ellie helps with the shopping, but Oliver's been so busy with his coding. Oliver once broke the dishwasher and somehow it was still my fault, and because I hadn't labeled the rinse aid clearly enough. You start to learn quite early on that love in this house was conditional. Like broadband speeds or the availability of hobnobs. It existed, but not for me. At least not in the way it did for the golden child. But I didn't kick off, didn't rebel. No drugs, no teenage pregnancy, no hiding vodka in my pencil. Case like half the girls at school. No, I just got very, very good at staying quiet and becoming excellent at things in silence. It's funny, isn't it? How invisibility can be a skill when applause isn't on offer. So yeah, that was the foundation. Sunday roast gaslighting with gravy. One son ordained as the future of British industry and one daughter told she'd make an excellent assistant if she smiled more and didn't ruffle feathers. But don't worry. The feathers get very ruffled later. So I went to Cambridge. Yes, that Cambridge. The one with gowns, gargoyles, and enough intergenerational wealth to make a hedge fund blush. I studied politics. Got top of my year. Graduated with honors and a caffeine addiction. You'd think that might raise a proud eyebrow back home. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Dad's reaction? A very underwhelming, "Oh, good." Like I'd just told him I'd successfully changed a light bulb. Or decided to stop using shampoo bars. You see, in our family, academic excellence is lovely and all. But unless it comes with a champagne-fueled launch event, at least one shirtless photo in front of a whiteboard, and a vague connection to tech, it might as well be a knitting badge from Brownies. After uni, I joined the civil service. Not because I couldn't think of anything else to do, but because, wait for it, I actually believed in making a difference. I know, adorable. And I was good at it. Climbed the ladder without stepping on anyone's face. Solved problems, built policies, attended terrifying meetings full of men named Nigel who thought climate change was a bit political. And I did it all without crashing the economy, defrauding investors, or calling myself a disruptor on LinkedIn. Quiet, competent, unremarkable, at least to my family. Because here's the thing. Oliver could set fire to a Tesco Metro and they'd still call him innovative. I could rewrite entire sections of national housing policy and Dad would just grunt and ask if I'd thought about getting into events. The civil service to them was basically glorified admin. I once explained my actual job title: Strategic Oversight for Public Policy Implementation in the Northwest, and Mom blinked twice and said, "So you do photocopying then?" "Sure, Mom, that's exactly it. I just stand in front of the printer all day like a sad office ghost, waiting for someone to appreciate my toner management skills." But Oliver, he starts a biodegradable chewing gum business out of a WeWork, and suddenly, it's Dragon's Den in the lounge. He doesn't even know how to spell governance. Meanwhile, I was writing governance frameworks with actual impact, real budgets, human beings affected. But no one wants a behind-the-scenes heroine. They want a front-page clown with a drone and a dream. So I kept working, kept rising, didn't shout, didn't demand praise, didn't launch a crypto scam called Eggcoin. Yes, that was a real pitch Oliver made at Christmas. I just quietly became someone with power influence and a terrifying ability to read legislation for fun. But in this family, if it's not got a press release and a badly edited promo video with stock music that sounds like a migraine, it does not count. At one point, Dad genuinely asked if I'd ever thought about doing something exciting with my life, like join a circus, or launch a sustainable flip-flop line, or, and I quote, get on telly, because nothing screams success like performing your self-worth for strangers on Channel 5. Meanwhile, I'm managing multi-million-pound budgets for the NHS and trying not to have a stress ulcer over flood planning in Cumbria. But sure, Dad, let me just abandon my career and become a TikTok motivational speaker who misquotes Churchill. The point is, you can do everything right. You can tick every box and still feel like a background extra in someone else's movie, one where Oliver gets a close-up for blinking and I get cut in the edit, because my success isn't noisy enough. But that's all right. I was playing the long game, and trust me, the payoff comes later, with a room full of powerful people, a judge, a dinner table, and one very satisfying pause. But we're not there yet. Stick around. So while I was out here quietly building an actual career that involved things like budgets, policy, and not committing fraud, my dear brother, Oliver was launching what he proudly described as his most disruptive idea yet. It was, and I quote, Uber but for lawnmowers. Yes, because the nation clearly is crying out for an app that lets you borrow a stranger's Flymo with the same urgency as a late-night kebab. The pitch was glorious in its chaos. Peer-to-peer lawn maintenance solutions, scalable across suburban regions, hyper-local, hyper-convenient, which translated from tech bro to English means, we forgot to invent a business, but we did make a logo. He called it MoMate. I wish I were making that up. There were sliders. There was a jingle. There was even a Mo coin attached, because why stop at one failing idea when you can have two? And of course, Dad was besotted. He threw money at it like it was a Kickstarter to bring back the empire. I mean, the man nearly remortgaged the summer home in Devon to help fund growth hacking strategy. Meanwhile, I asked him once, to read the article I got published in a Whitehall policy review, and he said, "Too many big words, love bit dry. Cheers, Dad. I'll be sure to dumb down public infrastructure next time." Anyway, there I am midweek in my office managing funding allocations for 4 counties. Actual real-life responsibility. Lives, roads, schools, you name it. Working late fielding crisis calls from MPs, who somehow still don't know how email works. And I get a call from Mom. She's breathless, buzzing. "Your brother's just been invited to speak at a tech conference. Isn't that wonderful?" Yes, absolutely. Nothing inspires confidence like a man explaining hedge trimming to a room full of venture capitalists while wearing trainers he bought for networking energy. So a few weeks later, I sit down to dinner with the family. Having just been promoted to regional governor, it's a pretty big deal, actually. More oversight, national committees, larger teams, actual decision-making power. So I mention it very casually, as you do when you've spent years being told you're a bit quiet. Dad blinks. "So you're still in that office job?" Yes, Dad, the office job. You know, the one that determines infrastructure funding for 4 counties, handles emergency response protocols, and requires me to occasionally speak to ministers without crying. But sure, let's talk more about Oliver's electric sheep shearing app. Oh yes, that was his follow-up to MoMate Shear Genius, a precision livestock solution for the ethical grooming of free-range animals, which in normal human terms was a pair of smart clippers and an overinflated ego. It's not that I mind Oliver's experiments. Honestly, I wish him well. I just wish I didn't have to sit at a family dinner listening to a grown man with 2 failed companies under his belt talk about brand synergy while I'm being asked if I've considered becoming a PA. And look, I get it, I'm not flashy. I don't do keynote speeches. I don't post vague tweets about hustle culture. But I do actually do my job. I fix things, build systems, make people's lives marginally less disastrous. Oliver, he once got locked out of his own app, literally couldn't log in, tried to blame the algorithm. It was his birthday. But no matter what he launched, lawnmowers, livestock, whatever, Dad was always there with the checkbook and that look in his eyes like he was watching the trailer to his own legacy. Meanwhile, I was budgeting NHS supply chains during a national shortage and still being introduced at parties as the one who works with forms or something. But that's fine. Truly, I'm not bitter. I'm just storing it all like a squirrel hoarding receipts. Because, spoiler alert, one day we'd all be at a dinner table with very important people and someone would ask me what I do, and this time I wouldn't need to downplay it. This time there'd be no more blinking. But we're not there yet. That story, the good one, is still warming in the oven. It started, as most low-key acts of familial psychological warfare do, with a text from Mom. Dinner next Friday. Dad's networking thing. Would love to have you there, X. Translation. Oliver's dragging in someone important and we need a girl in a dress to balance the energy out. Subtext. Please don't bring up Brexit again like last time. Apparently, it was one of Dad's, semi-formal business social hybrids, which is posh code for a bunch of overconfident men with receding hairlines, pretending to be modest while low-key bragging about yacht shares. I declined at first. Firmly, politely, with the confidence of someone who knows full well she's only invited to these things for ornamental value. Mum rang an hour later. Just come love, he wants to show off the family. Oh, does he? What a privilege. To be paraded around like a sentient LinkedIn endorsement. And let's be honest, showing off the family in this context doesn't mean me. It means Oliver, golden boy, walking TED Talk in a waistcoat. And I'd be seated somewhere near the canapes, a strategic distance from anything that might require eye contact or validation. Still, I went, because apparently I'm still 7 years old trying to get a gold star in daughtering. So the big night arrives. I put on the dress, the one that says, I'm smart but not threatening, a sensible heel, minimal jewelry, just enough eyeliner to suggest I have a soul, but not enough to alarm the conservatives. We arrive at this painfully over-decorated dining room where the air smells like money and old steak. The guest list is very who's who of minor British influence. Local councillors, estate developers, a man who once appeared on Question Time and hasn't shut up about it since. But the guest of honor, the main event, was a retired high court judge. Of course he was. White beard, pocket watch. Smelled like leather-bound law books and lingering disappointment. He wore tweed, unironically, like a man who names his trousers. Everyone was fawning over him like he was Judi Dench in a bow tie. And Dad? Dad was glowing. Not with paternal pride, no, with networking lust. You know that glassy look people get when they're trying to remember your job title and mentally monetize it. Oliver arrives, late, on purpose, with his new investor TM in tow, a man with the exact energy of someone who says things like, let's circle back, in casual conversation. And then there's me, just sitting there, like a sentient IKEA lamp, smiling, nodding, offering the occasional comment like, no, I haven't tried ayahuasca. And yes, public funding is more complex than people assume. Oliver gets introduced with actual applause. No joke. Dad pats his back like he's returned from war. Mum beams like she's in a John Lewis Christmas advert. I get, Ellie's here too, she's still doing that office job thing. Yes, Dad. That office job thing. The one where I manage regional policy planning and emergency response strategy for nearly 1 million people. But no, please. Let's all hear more about how Oliver has a new prototype for eco-friendly beard oil packaging. Then the judge, the tweedy beacon of gravitas, looks directly at me during dessert and asks, So what is it that you do, young lady? And everyone stops. Forks midair. Mouths half open, like someone just dropped a wine glass in slow motion. I clear my throat, smile the smile of someone who's been waiting years. I'm the regional governor for the North Midlands. Silence, followed by, You're the governor. Yes, yes I am. Cue the quiet horror of realizing you've just underestimated. The only person in the room with actual power. Dad's face. Pure cinematic regret. Mum blinked like someone had unplugged her. And Oliver? Oliver laughed nervously and tried to make a joke about government pay scales. It was beautiful. Delicious. Better than pudding. But that's not quite where the story ends. There's still more awkwardness to spoon through. Because the aftermath? The fallout. The shifting of family tectonics. Oh, it's coming. But for now, know this. That dinner, that simple RSVP trap, was the beginning of something new. Not a reconciliation, not redemption, but revelation. And finally, I wasn't background wallpaper anymore. There are dinners, and then there are networking dinners, the kind where you arrive hungry and leave, with emotional damage and a decorative mint leaf. The food was what I call posh trauma cuisine. Things you're told are expensive, because they've been reduced. 3 times and plated with tweezers. We started with what I think was duck. Possibly it might have been a pigeon, with a trust fund. It came with a smear of something beige, a single basil leaf, and the haunting taste of regret. Everything was cold: the duck, the dining room, the atmosphere. Even the wine looked like it wanted to leave early. And the conversation? A greatest hits compilation of men with opinions. Golf. Crypto? The decline of work ethic. All being discussed by men who haven't lifted anything heavier than a wine glass since Thatcher was in office. I swear one of them actually used the phrase, "Back in my day we earned respect," while mispronouncing quinoa for the 4th time. Oliver naturally was in his element, holding court at the far end of the table, like he was about to launch a cult or a limited-run podcast. He was explaining blockchain to someone's wife slowly, loudly, like she was a confused child or a Labrador with a banking problem. It's not just about Bitcoin, Sharon. It's about decentralized ownership across systems. Yes, Oliver. Nothing says financial liberation like a sweaty man in loafers, talking about NFTs between courses. I was on my 3rd glass of Pinot, not because it paired well with the food, but because it was the only thing keeping me from faking a medical emergency. I briefly considered clutching my chest and muttering, "I see the light," just to be excused for dessert. Dad? He was beaming, grinning like a man watching his legacy unfold in low lighting. Anytime Oliver opened his mouth, Dad gave this look, part pride, part hunger for validation, like he was hoping the retired judge would adopt Oliver on the spot and write him into a will. Mum kept glancing at me like I might start a fight, as if I've ever overturned a table in my life. Which, for the record, I have not, but I have corrected someone's use of literally during a starter course, so fair play. At one point, someone, a property developer in a velvet blazer, leaned over and asked me what I do for fun. I blinked, then said, "I enjoy watching infrastructure projects not collapse." He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. Meanwhile, Oliver was mid-anecdote about his time at a silent retreat in Portugal where he aligned with his brand purpose. Whatever that means, he ended it with "and that." As when I knew I had to pivot into eco-consulting. The judge actually nodded. I nearly inhaled my Pinot in despair. The energy in that room was somewhere between Dragon's Den and Midsummer Murders. Everyone was pretending to care, no one was listening, and I was mentally designing a business card that just said, "I'm not him." Eventually, dessert arrived. A deconstructed cheesecake, which is rich, because at that point I was also emotionally deconstructed. But just when I thought the night couldn't get any more surreal, that was when the judge turned to me, looked me dead in the eye, and asked the question. But that's part 6. Because when a man who smells like mahogany and Latin phrases leans in and asks, "You're the governor," well, let's just say the table wasn't the only thing shaking. So there we are. Dinner dragging its final breath like a Jane Austen character with a consumption subplot. Dessert half-eaten. Wine dangerously low. And the mood? Delicately unraveling. The judge, bless his tweedy little heart, has just finished asking me what I do, and is clearly still processing the fact that I'm not. In fact, the family's decorative houseplant, but the actual regional governor for 4 counties. Cue the awkward silence. You know the one. Where everyone suddenly finds their spoon incredibly fascinating and starts blinking like they're trying to Morse code, a time machine out of the situation. And that's when, out of absolutely nowhere, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of vintage port and decades of unchecked masculinity, Dad stands up. Yes, stands. Like he's about to deliver the final act of King Lear, except instead of thunder and betrayal, it's just roast lamb and suppressed childhoods. He raises his glass, clears his throat, and says, and I swear this is verbatim, I've always said my son was the ambitious one. My daughter's more comfortable in the background. Yes. The verbal slap that keeps on slapping, delivered with the confidence of a man who thinks emotional damage pairs well with cheese boards. Now, let's pause, because what's especially impressive about this moment is that he managed to insult me, minimize my career, invalidate my entire existence, and embarrass me in front of a high court judge, all in one neatly seasoned sentence. That's talent. Toxic, but talent nonetheless. The room went so quiet you could hear the soul leave my body. Oliver looked smug. Mum looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and sob into a linen napkin. The judge raised one eyebrow, possibly the most judicial form of yikes. And me? I smiled, because if I'd opened my mouth, I'd have unleashed a carefully archived folder of generational trauma and recited it like an A-level drama student on opening night. Dost thou mistake my silence for smallness, Father? For I carry this nation on shoulders thou hast ignored, that kind of thing. But I didn't, because I'm not petty. I'm patient. And besides, I knew something he didn't. The judge, still watching, still sipping, still looking at me like he was starting to do the maths in his head, adding up the policies, the promotions, the power. Dad thought he was making a point, declaring a hierarchy, establishing the throne and heir dynamic. But all he did was show his hand. And it was full of outdated playing cards from 1987. I mean, imagine being so desperate to prove your son's ambition that you ignore the daughter who's literally in charge of more infrastructure than his entire street has pavement. The best part, and by best I mean soul-achingly hilarious, was that he genuinely thought he was being complimentary, as if being comfortable in the background is some kind of compliment, like telling someone they have a resting face for radio. And look, once upon a time, that might have shattered me, made me spiral, question my worth, overeat hummus in the back of a cupboard, while listening to Florence and the Machine on loop. But not that night, not anymore, because the truth is, I wasn't in the background. I was just busy running the entire show off stage, while the so-called lead actor forgot his lines and tripped over the scenery. So I clinked my glass, held the judge's gaze, and said, well, some of us prefer results to applause. The silence after that, delicious, almost warm. Even the duck would have clapped, if it weren't already cold and half digested. So sometime between the after-dinner cheese and Oliver's third attempt to name drop Elon Musk without actually saying Elon Musk, the retired high court judge, who up to this point had been quietly nibbling, Stilton and radiating the kind of calm that only comes from knowing your pension's untouchable, turns to me, looks right at me, not through me, not past me, at me, and he asks, and what do you do? A simple question. A polite question. The sort of question that, in theory, should lead to a very proud, well, I'm the regional governor for the North Midlands, and a modest sip of wine. But no, because before I can even open my mouth, before I can even inhale, Dad jumps in. She works in admin, keeps things ticking over. Yes, admin. That mysterious office-based purgatory where women go to print things and wither. There was a beat of silence. You know the one. Where your body continues sitting politely, but your soul astral projects into the nearest potted fern. I blacked out slightly. I think I heard someone mutter, bless her. B-L-E-S-S-A-H-E-R, 2 syllables that may as well have been a funeral march for my dignity, said in the same tone you'd use for a slow-moving tortoise or someone who still uses Yahoo Mail. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced the unique horror of being professionally erased by your own father in front of someone who quite literally used to decide the fate of murder trials. But I don't recommend it. It's spicy. My fork was frozen midair. My Pinot tasted like betrayal. Even the olives looked offended. To be clear, I am not, and have never been, an administrator. No offense to admin staff. They're the backbone of the country, Raydan, but that is not my job. I run regional infrastructure, emergency planning, transport reform, housing development, policy rollouts that affect nearly 1 million people. You know, minor things. But sure, admin. Just me in a cardigan answering phones and reminding Dave from HR that the biscuits are for everyone. The judge, bless him in a non-condescending way, paused, turned to me, and said, "Is that right?" And for one glorious moment, I let the silence stretch. I let Dad fidget. Let Mum tap. Her glass like that might somehow summon a time portal back to before he opened his mouth. Then I smiled and said, "Not quite. I manage emergency response and strategic infrastructure across the region. I also lead policy negotiations with central government and oversee a team of 92.
But yes, I do occasionally answer emails."
You could hear Oliver's ego deflate like a novelty balloon at a children's party. The property developer on my left made an involuntary noise. The judge leaned back, nodded, and said, "Now that sounds like a proper job." Dad looked like he'd swallowed a particularly sharp breadstick. Mum went completely still. Oliver picked at his cuff like it might contain a trapdoor. And me? I just kept eating my biscuit. Triumph tastes better with chutney anyway. Because here's the thing. For years, they'd written me off, filed me under reliable, quiet, supportive background energy. But it turns out, when you stop apologizing for existing and start calmly stating facts, even the most powerful people in the room pay attention, especially when they're wearing tweed and smell like judgment and expensive ink. So there I was, sitting amid the aftermath of Dad's Shakespearean slip-up, the kind of moment where you're not sure whether to cry, laugh, or pour your wine into a plant pot. The judge, the very embodiment of British judicial gravitas, fixed me with a look that suggested he was both confused and mildly impressed, like someone who just found out their afternoon tea came with an unexpected slice of trifle. He leaned forward slightly, eyebrows raised in the way that means, "Please do continue." Because I was not expecting this, and that's when I decided to serve my vengeance. Not with a sword, nor with a passive-aggressive tweet, but with cold, hard facts. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm the regional governor for public policy and strategic reform for the Northwest. I oversee infrastructure development and emergency response coordination." The room went silent, the kind of silence you only hear at the end of a particularly awkward family Zoom call. Even Oliver, usually busy inventing new ways to sound like a business guru, without actually having a business, stopped mid-sentence. Christmas miracle, I thought. The judge blinked, then repeated incredulously, "Wait, you're the governor?" Like I'd just confessed to being Beyoncé's long-lost sibling or maybe a secret MI5 agent. Dad, meanwhile, looked like he'd swallowed a button. You know the look, equal parts. I didn't rehearse for this, and how do I undo this sentence? I took a slow sip of my Earl Grey, the most dignified weapon in my arsenal, and smiled a little smile. A smile that said, "Yes, Dad, I am the governor. And no, I don't need a flashy startup or a TED Talk to prove it. Because here's the rub. All those years of quiet slog, the underappreciated office hours, the endless meetings that made my head spin and my heart ache. They'd built something real. Not just a LinkedIn headline, not just a shiny logo slapped on an app that no one uses. Real responsibility, real impact, real power. Oliver, bless him, was still rattling off something about blockchain-powered hedge trimming or some equally baffling nonsense, but the judge's eyes were on me now. Full respect mode activated, and in that moment I didn't just feel like the governor of a region, I felt like the governor of the unspoken truth in that room. That success doesn't always roar. Sometimes it quietly signs off on policy documents that keep your roads safe and your hospitals stocked. So yeah, Dad's idea of ambition was a bit, well, narrow. But I was here quietly rewriting the script, and the best part? No one could interrupt me. The morning after the dinner that felt like a poorly rehearsed Shakespearean tragedy. My phone buzzed. A message from Mum. And if you think it was well done, love, or proud of you, you clearly don't know my family. Nope, it was the classic, passive-aggressive novella that only mums with years of emotional endurance can craft. She wrote, "Your father's a bit shaken. Next time maybe warn us." Warn you? About what exactly? That your daughter is qualified, employed, and apparently not just comfortable in the background. Sure, Mum, I'll fax over a formal memo next time. Maybe a PowerPoint presentation, complete with charts and a dramatic crescendo. Honestly, I could almost hear Dad's fragile ego squeaking like a poorly oiled hinge. Meanwhile, Oliver's Uber for lawnmowers dream, yes, that glorious brainwave that promised to revolutionize suburban greenery, lasted exactly 3 weeks longer than the verdict on Love Island. It collapsed spectacularly. Turns out, people don't want to rent lawnmowers from strangers online. Who knew? Who indeed? Oliver took it like a champ, telling anyone who'd listen that it was a strategic pivot. In reality, it was a polite way of saying I'm now unemployed and living off my mum's banoffee pie. Dad's investment looked like a bad decision, the kind that makes you reconsider those open bar invitations. As for me, I quietly carried on being the regional governor, the person who actually makes things work. No flashy launch parties, no shiny apps, just a steady stream of crisis meetings, policy papers, and phone calls that start with, "Have you heard about the pothole on the A34? Family life continued as normal. Dad still called Oliver the visionary at inconvenient moments. Mom sent me the occasional cryptic text about family unity that translated to, "Don't make us choose." And Oliver? Well, he's currently exploring new opportunities, which in family code means still figuring it out. The whole saga is honestly a reminder that sometimes the loudest noise comes from the smallest accomplishments, and sometimes quietly getting on with it is the most radical thing you can do. Because at the end of the day, success isn't always a viral tweet or a disruptive startup. Sometimes it's just not being defined by the people who barely look up from their Sunday roast. All right, let's get real for a moment. Or as real as you can when your family thinks ambition means having a better LinkedIn profile than you. Here's the thing about being told you've failed by the people. Who should be cheering the loudest? You don't need to set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. No pyrotechnics required. No dramatic speeches. No reality TV confessionals, though. Honestly, I'd watch that. Sometimes the best revenge, the real masterclass move-in, is just to live well, quietly, unapologetically, like a cat that knows it owns the sofa, but lets everyone else think it's their space. And the cherry on top? Having your dad's posh judge friend, who smells of leather-bound books and mild disapproval, publicly validate your entire career while your father chokes on a miniature Yorkshire pudding because Karma, that slow-moving, impeccably dressed lady, she may take her time, she doesn't rush, but when she shows up, it's in heels, smelling of expensive perfume and schadenfreude. And trust me, she knows exactly what room you're in. So next time someone looks at you like you're the family's failed science project, or that you're just the admin, smile, take a slow sip of your tea, preferably Earl Grey, because we're posh like that. And wait. Wait for the moment when all those whispered doubts and sideways glances turn into a standing ovation in your head. Because sometimes, surviving the family roast dinner isn't about carving up the lamb, but carving out your own space. And if you ever need a reminder, just think of me, sitting at the table watching Dad realize he bet on the wrong horse while I quietly sign off on the infrastructure budget that keeps half the country moving. So here's to all of us who've been comfortable in the background. We're not in the wings. We're the whole bloody theater. So that's the story. I'm Ellie, new governor, and possibly the only person to ever weaponize career success at a dinner party in Cheshire. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a budget meeting and a Victoria sponge to demolish. Cheers.